Welcome to the North State Rocks podcast. Discover the hidden gems and extraordinary people of California's North State region. Join Perry Thompson, CEO of Hat Creek Construction and Materials, as he explores the vibrant communities and interesting neighbors that make our region a great place to live, work, and play. Tune in, be inspired, and rediscover the North State. This is your community. This is your story.
Welcome to the North State Rocks podcast. This episode features Richard Egan, recently retired county executive officer of Lassen County and a multi-generational rancher. Richard shares his remarkable journey from starting with just 8 cows to building a 600-head cattle operation while serving the community through 30 years in county government, offering unique insights into rural leadership, land management, and the rewards of balancing public service with agricultural entrepreneurship.
You know, what I love about you, Richard, is you're kind of that rare individual where you've been, you're ranching, boots in the dirt, and then also have had that just spectacular, service background with Lassen County too, where you're interacting with the community and dealing with the, hey, God damn it, I pay my taxes pay for your salary type stuff. And of course, then you're on the ranch side going, yeah, I pay them too, buddy. I get it. So I guess I want to start with kind of your ranch. I think that's probably the, good. And then we'll get to your career in the county second, but tell me a little bit about, the history of your ranch, how it came to be, how, what the ownership looks like, and then also what a day in Richard's boots on the ranch look like too for us.
Sure. I'm happy to. I don't know if it'll be quite as exciting as you make it sound, but here goes.
I think it's great.
So my parents moved up to the Susanville area in 1970.
Okay.
When I was a young boy, I was 3. So essentially all of my memories are from this area.
Okay.
And my parents bought a ranch up here, or a couple ranches, and so I grew up in that environment. I come from a pretty large family. There's 5 of us siblings, spread 6 years apart, so a pretty close but big family. And so we all grew up working on the ranch, and my dad had us driving tractors when we were 8, 9, 10 years old, and taking care of feeding cows and horses, and so I kind of grew up with that. Just as I didn't know any better. It was just kind of part of life, and I look back and really I'm grateful for that because I really enjoyed it back then. But that's kind of how I guess I first got my interest in agriculture and the cattle especially. But as far as how things evolved, I grew up I guess I would consider it to be a real traditional type family on the ranch for those days in the early 70s, doing the 4-H and FFA and those sorts of things with the family. Our family's always been very close. The 5 of us siblings and my parents, when they were alive, we were always kind of a very close family, and so I never really envisioned not having that as part of my life. I would say,
yeah.
But as things turn out, when I graduated from high school, quite a long time ago now, 1985. Went to Chico State,
okay,
and studied agriculture. There was the degree that I received. But getting back to the ranch and the business structure, so in 1985, all 5 of us siblings were either in college or entering college. I have 2 older brothers, an older sister, and my twin brother Joe that I know you have met.
Yeah.
And so we were all entering college or in college, and my father at the time, who was a young man, at least by today's standards, was 50 years old and got diagnosed with terminal cancer and subsequently died 6 months later. So that, kind of radically changed the trajectory of the family farm at that point. And he was very adamant back at that time that, because we were all able-bodied, young adults at that point.
Right.
And, we were all saying, well, we'll stay home and take care of the farm and, all the stuff that they had going on and so forth. And my mom and dad both were very adamant about the fact that, no, that's not what we're doing. You guys are all going to go get an education. Education's always been a big priority in my family going back a generation.
Wow.
And so at that time, the family really scaled things back. My father died about 6 months later. My mom sold all the cows, all the livestock, all the equipment, a big part of the ranches, and just kind of leased things out while we all were away at college. And we had a lot of family disagreements about that at the time, about whether that was the appropriate thing to do or not. And I think 30 plus years later, it was. But
yeah.
But anyway, so I finished up my education there at Chico, got my degree in agriculture, and during my time at college, I spent my summers coming back to the Susanville area, and I worked for local ranchers on the haying crews, the Hagataw and Hanson family.
Wow.
And did that every summer, which it was hard work, but it was rewarding work, and I look back fondly on those days too.
Yeah.
In doing that, and I kind of always wanted to be involved in that, but not necessarily as a worker, but more of a manager, owner. And so, time goes on, and I met my wife, who's currently my wife. Has been my wife for quite a while. Holly, I know you've met.
Yep. Holly's amazing.
In college, and she was also studying agriculture, and she had taken a job as an ag teacher down in the Sacramento Valley in Arbuckle. And so I took a job in the Colusa area, working for Farm Credit, which is really, I guess, I would say that was kind of my first professional job, so to speak, doing ag lending and analysis and that sort of thing, and really enjoyed that. But I was always kind of drawn back to the Susanville area. I always envisioned living here, raising a family, having a ranch, and that sort of thing. And my wife, however, Holly, was from Southern California. It wasn't
Right.
so. Wasn't so enamored, I guess, at the time, at least, with the area. But time goes on, and after a few years down in the valley, a teaching position at Lassen High School came available, and I convinced Holly to apply for that job. And kind of made a deal with her that if you get the job and we move up there, we'll go up there for 3 years, and if you don't like it, I'll move wherever you want to go, but we got to give it a try. And she reluctantly agreed to that. And as you know, I couldn't drag her out of here now.
Yeah.
The rest is history. But anyway, that's kind of how we came back to the area. And the cattle business.
You told me how she came back, right? So her career path, but what did you do, or did you guys work apart for a while, or elaborate on that just a little bit more?
No, really kind of interesting. We actually, at the same time that the teaching position came available, there was advertised a job at the county for a brand new position, and I really want to get into this because it's a very interesting story. It was the county had, and I didn't know this when I applied for the position
Right.
so much.
Right.
They had, and there's some parallels to, I think, what's going on today too that are kind of interesting. But this was in 1994. The county had hired a consultant to come in and apply for grants, and they were, in hindsight, and hindsight is what it is. They were indiscriminately applying for any free money that was out there, and they hadn't really put a lot of thought into administering the grant.
Sure.
So they had hired this consultant. He'd gone out and wrote all these great grant applications and got all these great grants, and then they were kind of dumped in the county's lap, and so they decided, hey, we need somebody to manage these grants.
Right.
Right. And I applied for that job. And
what was the title? What was the job title at the time?
At the time, it was called development specialist, and the job title really didn't
represent what you're really doing very well. Yeah,
it really didn't. And so and I took to be quite frank, I kind of took the job thinking, gosh, I need to make a living and make some money so that I can afford to buy some cows and make a living doing that. Yeah. That was kind of my intent.
And at that time, your mom had still held on to the ranch, just been leasing it out, correct?
Right. So my mom was still living in the old ranch house and living on the ranch and just leasing the property out. And and just kind of a sidetrack. My mother was just a saint and one of the toughest people that you could ever meet. You can imagine being a widow at about 50 years of age with 5 kids in college and everything that goes along with that. And she, looked back very fondly on that too. But,
that's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's part of the reason I think, that in my family is really, really important.
Yeah. Absolutely makes sense. Yeah. Sounds like an understatement deal with 5 of you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine. Right. And then, yeah. Okay. So anyway, sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
Yeah. So anyway, I took this job and I'll just describe a couple of the grants because they're actually kind of humorous, I think. They had one of the grants they had applied for was it was a federal and state grant from the federal and state to the county government to take some money and loan it to a private party to start a business in the hopes that would create some jobs, and then the repayment of that loan to the county would then be used to make more loans, right?
Yep.
It looks good on paper.
Sounds good on paper, but a lot of businesses fail when they start up. So, yeah, I'm interested to see where this goes. Okay.
Yeah, so just prior to me getting there, they had gotten this grant. They had made this, I think, $300,000 loan, which, probably would be equivalent to more like $1 million today.
Of course, yeah.
They had loaned this $300,000 out to a company called the California Pork Company.
The California what company?
California Pork Company.
Port, like P-O-R-T?
No, pork, like pig.
Oh, pork. Okay. All right. I'm with you. Yeah. Okay.
And the principals of that organization were the chairman of the planning commission at the time, and I think the president or vice president of the community college.
Yeah.
And what could go wrong? So the idea was to build a hog farm in the Wendell area.
Okay.
And raise pigs and sell them locally. And I, coming from agriculture, and this as well as I do, there's reason that certain things are done in certain areas of the country. We fatten cattle in Kansas, Colorado, and Nebraska because that's where they grow corn.
Yeah.
So similarly, that's where you raise pigs because that's where the feed is.
Yes.
And the favorable climate.
Yes.
Anyway, so they'd loaned this money out to do this, to buy property, build infrastructure, buy hogs, and the money had all been spent. And so my first job was to kind of go out and see how things were going out there. And the building was still in a pile, had never been erected. there was no hogs, and there never were any hogs.
Oh my goodness!
And all of the documentation in terms loan agreements and security instruments and things like that was either unexecuted or insufficient in some other way, and they were in, and everything was in a second or third position behind a local bank who'd also kind of gotten sucked along for the ride on this. So anyway, that project ultimately failed in grand fashion, and a lot of people will remember that. But it's kind of where I cut my teeth in terms of the county government in articulating the the issues surrounding that, and to the board of supervisors, and here's why you leave lending to the professionals, and local governments are not that good at it, and so forth. And another grant was to construct 12 homes in Lassen County and sell them or make them available to lower income people. 4 in Beaver, 4 in Doyle, as I recall, and 4 in Westwood. And you'll know from your business when local or state government does a public works project, they are required to pay prevailing wage, and I always use quotes when I say prevailing wage, because it's never the prevailing rate of wage in the local area, right?
It's union wages is what it really is in the city.
Yeah. So anyway, we built these. The idea was to build these $80,000 homes at a cost of about $150,000, and then sell them to people that were uncreditworthy and couldn't afford them, and hope to get repaid.
Again, what could go wrong?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And part of the notion of a lot of these grants were that they had to be made to people that were otherwise uncreditworthy, because it was unfair to compete with the bank. So so there were real. So, and this is maybe a long way of explaining to you why often I'm seen as the cynic in terms of grants and economic development, that sort of thing. But anyway, so during the course of all that, I had, it became my role to address the board of supervisors and kind of explain, the ramifications of doing certain things, and in both of those instances, the county ended up having to take, essentially local taxpayer money and repay those grants because the terms and conditions of them were not met.
Wow.
And how that impacts other services by the county.
100%. Yeah.
And was a real eye opener for me in terms of how you and you see it today. A lot of people see a great opportunity to go do something, and there's so many strings attached that it ends up costing money and not achieving the goal that you wanted.
Right.
So I've become over the years very, I don't want to say cynical, but very cautious about those sorts of things. And during the course of that, I made many presentations to the board of supervisors and analysis about risk and cost and so forth. And I guess I know I'm getting way off the topic here, but I back to the ranch. I never envisioned I'd get that involved in county business at that point in my career. I really just needed a job for a few years until I could make a living doing that.
Yeah.
But shortly after that, the county administrative officer that was there at the time, a fellow named Bill Bixby, had seen me doing what I was doing, my analytical skills and my presentation and so forth, and said, hey, would you? He said, I want to create a position that essentially addresses the county budget in a holistic way. And back at the time, the county budget was about $40 million. It's a fraction of what it is today, but it was still complex. A lot of revenue sources and a lot of different priorities. And I want one person to kind of have a handle on that. And after working, and my prior position was housed in the planning and building department, and I would have taken, after some of these grant things, I would have been happy being the spotter at the landfill.
Yeah.
And so, when the county administrative officer came to me and said, "Hey, I kind of like what I see. Would you come over and work for me?" I jumped at the
Oh, I
opportunity.
bet. Absolutely.
And so glad I did.
Yeah.
So I went over there and, kind of got involved in the purchasing, personnel management, and a lot of the funding issues that are, can be pretty complex in the county. And did some refinancing. We did some things back then where interest rates had come down. We had a jail that we had a big note on, and I took on as a project refinancing that, saving a lot of money just in interest.
Oh, amazing.
Couple other projects. We built a juvenile hall and things, some special projects like that. And that's kind of where I guess I transitioned from this is a job to make a little money and buy a few cows to a professional career where where I'm going to spend a lot of time.
Yeah.
And so, and it's amazing how fast time passes when you look back on it.
Yeah, because I was just doing the math in '94, and then you retired obviously here in December of 24, and that makes sense. It's like 30 years of service, right? So,
right.
I've always felt like you were too young to be retiring, but 30 years of public service is a lot, especially it's not easy. You're going in front of the board all the time, and having to justify the decisions and people second guessing you all the time. And, that's their job. I get that too. But at the same time, it's got to be exhausting, always being second guessed, for 30 years. And you seem to have really deftly navigated that political, because these county positions are political, right? You have to get along with all the people, and ultimately the board can. Well, is that true? I don't want to talk out of turn here. Can the board fire the CAO position?
Yeah. So, and I held many positions within the county, and most recently that I retired from the county executive position, works directly at the will of the board of supervisors. And it's their, and it's their role of the executive to execute the board's will. And fortunately, most of the time in my career, I would say I had similar philosophy and was like-minded most of the time with the board, so that made that easier. Do that.
Well, I think what's critical in that is that ranching background that you have, and not, unfortunately, a lot of people that I think ascend through government have just always been employees. And, there's a lot of great examples of people that have done an amazing job at that. But there's also a lot of examples of people that have never had to make a budget work. They've never had to, hey, guess what? Fertilizer just went up 25% overnight, and we got to figure out how to get through it. And a lot of the things that, you deal with in ranching, there's not enough cash to cover it. How am I going to get to the other end? I've got to feed my cattle. I've got to plant my crops. I've got to do those things. And rural, northeastern rural California, the people are figuring that out every day. And I will say that I feel like Lassen County, compared to most counties, is really well run economically. And, that's a direct reflection of your leadership for so many years, and who taught you to be a good leader as well. So can you expand on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, sure. And getting back to the ranch, you're absolutely right. And in our instance, in our business, I haven't really gotten back to that, but we started almost immediately once Holly and I moved back to the area, thinking about and building a concept for the cattle business, and we grew it very slowly over the last 30 years. We started with I went up to, I can remember it like it was yesterday. Drove up to the Modoc auction yard in Holly's Honda Accord, and
ready to hold some cattle back, huh?
Yeah, and I was I was sitting in the sale yard there, and I recognized a friend from down here that had taken some cattle up there to sell. And so the light bulb went on that his trailer is probably going to be empty on the way home. And so I said, hey, Ron, what are you doing this afternoon? I'm thinking about bidding on some cows. And he goes, oh, nothing. I'm just going to head back. So I bid on the first 8 cows that Holly and I bought, and there were 8 old broken mouth bred cows. And I remember buying them, and I looked back at my friend Ron, and he said, "That's plenty to fill my trailer." That's how, and he brought them back for me. But I guess the point of that is, you're always trying to make something out of nothing,
right,
when you're in that business. But anyway, so yeah. So you're absolutely right that there were a lot of people that helped shape my perspective on things,
right.
In local government. And there's just really too many to mention, but I will mention a few. When I was a young, and I mentioned, the first part of my career, that was about the first 5 years of my career when I worked for planning and then the county administrative officer. And it was in 1998, actually.
Okay.
The treasurer tax collector at the time had announced that she was going to retire. And I had some people in the county that other department heads that I had worked with. Ron Jarrell is kind of a famous sheriff from days gone by.
Okay.
Teresa Nagel, Irene Doyle, Ken Bunch, who were all, that I really looked up to and admired as far as their leadership. And they came to me and encouraged me, hey, why don't you put your name in the hat for this elected position? We like how you present, how you I've always been kind of a straightforward person,
right,
and an open book,
yeah,
and it's a lot due to seeing some of those people and how they operated. And I mentioned Bill Bixby, the county executive at the time. Also, just a real. He's gone now, but he was an old school, straightforward, no nonsense, no coddling, no woke, nothing kind of guy, right? And really learned a lot from him about the hard truths about public service. So anyway, with the encouragement of those people, and also just a lot of local residents and supporters and friends and family, I said, okay, I guess I guess I'm in this county thing. I'm gonna run for the tax collector position,
right.
And little did I know at the time when I signed up, I was going to be running against the chairman of the board of supervisors' wife, and the assistant tax collector at the time.
Yeah.
So
what could go wrong?
Yeah, it wasn't it wasn't a slam dunk shoe-in election. I often say, everybody should run for public office once, but if you do it twice, you're probably crazy. Because it's extremely rewarding to find people in the community that you don't even know that support you,
yeah,
and what you believe in,
yeah,
what you stand for, but again, and then it's also very, and I was at a young age. I was I think 31 when I ran for the office. And so, looking back, I wasn't as mature as I am now about a lot of things. And you find, your friends are supporting your opponent, and people that you thought were
right,
your diehard supporters or not. And you go through this emotional roller coaster during that time. But anyway, I was successful. So I was elected to that position, and right around the same time that my wife and I had our son Nathan, and so I'll digress just a little bit there on the family side too. well, you can't do the kinds of careers that I have had and accomplish the things in terms of business without a supportive family. And and I've been blessed, and I think you have as well,
100%.
with family that believe in you and support you, and kind of pick up the slack when you're not able to.
Yeah.
So I give them, especially my wife, a lot of credit, but also my son, who's now grown and off doing his own thing. But anyway, so I did that. I being the treasurer tax collector of rural California County is by far the best job in the county, bar none. And
Really?
I've had several.
See, my knee-jerk assumption would be that people are pissed at you that they're having you're raising their taxes and they're having to write checks to you. And I know I'm never happy writing the massive checks that we write to Lassen County for the tax stuff, and that's never a fun time for me. So help me out with why you would define that as one of the best jobs.
Yeah, there's an element of that. I'll grant that, but there's a lot of sides to the office, and with the treasurer side, which doesn't get as much billing as the tax collector side of it, is really an important and interesting component. It's you're entrusted with safekeeping the money of the county, which back then was $40 million. Now it's about 150 or so.
Yeah.
And investing that and guarding it. You're also not, as an elected official, elected treasurer, you're not. You don't have a thumb on you by a board or a supervisor, or you're essentially empowered to operate your department the way that you think it should be. Within certain boundaries.
Sure.
And you get to see, I think, people like yourself. You get to see the people that, in my view, the public servants are really working for. The people that are paying the bills.
Yeah.
And, the homeowners and the business owners, and, you get to see them twice a year coming in. And yeah, granted, they're not always happy, but they are good people. Yes. And, you mentioned earlier, sometimes when you're a public servant, you've got the people that say, I pay your salary and you work for me.
Right.
And I got to say, categorically, and you get to see, as tax collector, you get to see who actually pays the big tax bills and who doesn't.
True.
It's very often the ones that are not paying the tax bills, or paying a very small tax bill. They're the most vocal ones, and the ones that are paying the multi-million-dollar tax bills are some of the most generous and best people that you see. The other side, and I always felt like I did more economic development as a tax collector than I ever did back in planning. I was very aggressive about selling tax delinquent property, and not because I enjoyed kicking widows out of their home.
Right. Yeah.
But because when I saw it over the 15 years that I was a tax collector, you would have, for example, a dilapidated home in a neighborhood, or a dilapidated piece of property with an absentee landowner, or a landowner who'd gone to prison or what have you, that wasn't paying their taxes. And we'd conduct a tax sale, and you would have a lot of people, the neighbors in the neighborhood, or entrepreneurs, or people that just are trying to make something out of nothing, come and buy that property at a tax sale for a small amount of money, put a bunch of sweat equity into it, and either live in it, rent it out, or resell it.
Right.
And you drive by those homes, maybe a year or two after you sold this fallen down thing, and there's a nice home.
Yeah.
And somebody made a few bucks, and
most importantly, you didn't start the degeneration of an entire sector of the community, and that's how it starts, is one place going completely dilapidated, weeds growing everywhere, trash piling up, and God forbid, homeless people starting to live there and everything else. And then pretty soon it's almost like a cancer that seems like it spreads. And I feel like that philosophy you took really attacked that at the root cause before it could get out of hand.
Yeah. And a lot of my friends would joke about how much I enjoy selling people's property. And I guess there's a little bit of truth to that,
Yeah.
but
For good reason. I mean, and yes, so there's terrible things that happen to people, and you've got to have empathy for that, and I know you do. I know you well enough that you've had empathy for that kind of stuff, but your responsibility is to the greater good of your community and your county. And so that's why you've got to do the hard. It's like in my business, it's like letting go a maybe talented but cancerous member of our team, right? I mean, it hurts. I think if you ever are in the place where it's easy to let people go or it's easy to sell property like that, you probably shouldn't be doing it. But when you remind yourself you have an obligation to do it for the greater good, in my case, of our team and of our company culture, in your case, to a whole community and to a county, then you've got to suck it up and do it, And so that's how I sleep at night. I'm sure that's probably very similar philosophies of what you're talking about here.
Yeah. And during my time as tax collector, and I sincerely really did enjoy it. I also had the opportunity we brought in some efficiencies to the department, and little things, but things like making taxes payable online and improving the systems that we utilized for assessment and collection,
Sure.
that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it did I feel like we did a really good job and set the stage for how that needs to be done, and that there's certainty in if you don't pay your taxes, there's consequences,
right.
And not in a mean fashion, but just that there is certainty that
absolutely
everybody's got to pay their share. And I felt like we really did a good job there. I also had the opportunity to get involved in some of the risk management of the county, which isn't really a traditional treasurer tax collector role, but I was interested in it. And there is a component of investment because of the self-insured nature of local government. And so I got involved in that on behalf of the county to try to mitigate some of the costs of insurance. And I know in your business.
Oh my God, it's brutal. Yeah.
Workman's comp and liability and property.
It's insane.
It's a growing cost, and so in the public sector, in the county government, we formed primarily two joint powers authorities between rural counties and larger counties to self-insure and administer our own workman's comp program, and just as kind of a insight into how that works. When you hire a third-party administrator, as a lot of jurisdictions did in administering workman's comp, that third-party administrator gets compensated based on how many cases there are. And so there's almost like a conflict
of interest.
Of settling those
100%.
cases.
Yeah.
And so we took the approach that, I don't like workman's comp. I think there's a lot of bad claims that are made, frankly, and they need to be challenged. But at the end of the day, the foremost cost savings measure is to process them through the process and get them taken care of and off the books. And so I really involved myself in that a little bit. And I think that that's proven to be a good strategy. The county continues that today. But in so doing, boards of supervisors are a very unique body, I guess, to say the least.
Of course. They're a cross section of the community, so of course it's going to be interesting, right?
Yeah, and some of my favorite people in the world were on the boards of supervisors, and some people that weren't.
Yeah,
and everything in between.
Right.
But from time to time over the course of my career as tax collector, the board would either they would have a vacancy in the county executive position, and that could be because they fired him because they got mad, or they left for one reason or another. But oftentimes without without a real succession plan, right? So
Right.
Tuesday would come around, and the executive's fired, and then the board would go, "Oh, hey, we don't have an executive."
Yeah.
and several times they looked to me to kind of fill in the role on an interim basis, like, Richard, would you kind of keep the wheels on the bus while we recruit and hire another executive? And I did that several times, and I think probably because of my background with the budget and some other things, it was valuable to the organization to do that. And each time, I will say, there were, one or more board members that said, "Hey, maybe you ought to just apply for the permanent job." And at the time, I'm thinking, I got a son in high school. I need to work a few more years. I don't know if I'm ready to be.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to wake up every Tuesday and wonder if I'm looking for a job. So I didn't do it initially, but as time went on, and I just became more involved in things. About I think it was my fourth term as tax collector. They had this episode where there was suddenly a vacancy in the executive office, and they asked me to be interim, and I said, yeah, sure. And then I thought about it. I said, you know what, I'm kind of tired of just seeing executives come and go. I think I want to put my name out there and see if maybe I can bring some stability to it.
Yeah.
And fortunately at the time the board agreed, and they hired me to do that. And
now I want to be clear. You keep calling it the executive position. Are you talking about the CAO position, or is that
yeah,
the same?
yeah. I use the term interchangeable.
Yep.
The county administrative
Understand.
officer is the county executive.
Yep.
And the titles are interchangeable.
Understood. Yeah, I'm tracking now. Okay. Perfect.
Yeah. And so that's what I did, and that was and I didn't at that time I was in my mid to late 40s.
Okay.
When I took on the position.
About what year was that then, roughly?
I'm sorry, 2014.
Yeah. Okay.
2014. And by county executive standards, pretty young. Yeah. Pretty young.
Would agree.
I can remember going to the statewide meetings and seeing all these old guys that were in the same position that I was in.
Yeah.
But and so that role is is far different than being an elected department head, in that you're really subordinate to the board of supervisors.
Right.
The way I always viewed the role was that I was an advisor to the board and an analyst, and provided them what I thought was the best course of action, different alternatives, but at the end of the day, executing their action.
Yep.
And like I said earlier, most of the time I was like-minded, and so it was easy to do.
Right.
But there's a lot of personnel management, and I know I'm not telling you anything.
A lot. There's a lot there.
It is just really all-consuming effort sometimes.
Is it fair to say, in that executive position, as you call it, is it fair to say that you're basically the filter between, and the safety net between the county employees and yourself, right? So the board, if they want somebody gone in a certain position, they kind of have to explain how that process works. They go through you.
Yeah.
Have to do that. They can't just fire them directly, correct?
Right. So very, it's a little more complicated than you might think, but there's basically three categories of county officers. You have your elected officers, your treasurer, auditor, sheriff, district attorney, clerk.
Okay.
And those are, they're elected by the people. The county executive has some oversight over their personnel.
Okay.
Some oversight, and their budgets. Then you have board-appointed department heads, which are appointed by the Board of Supervisors, and that would be like until recently your fair manager, ag commissioner, chief probation officer, veteran service officer, and I'm probably missing one there. But those are appointed by the Board of Supervisors and supervised in some fashion by the county executive, and their personnel and their budgets are supervised. Then you have the direct reports to the county executive, and those would be some of the larger departments, and by far the bulk of the employees. That would be health and social service departments, planning and building, the road department, and that's predominantly it. But that's by far the bulk of the employees.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. But generally speaking, and having worked with elected appointed, directly appointed department heads, generally there's a really good cooperation between personnel administration and those department heads because personnel management, particularly when it comes to terminations and discipline, that sort of thing, is a minefield and very complicated. So elected sheriff or elected DA might say, "Hey, I got a problem over here, but I'm not an expert in this. I need a personnel, an HR specialist to help out." So there's generally some really good cooperation and not a lot of disagreement when it comes to those sorts of decisions. But you're right in that a lot of those decisions ultimately come to the executive for making, in terms of hiring, firing, discipline, promotions, and that sort of thing. And does provide a level of insulation from the Board of Supervisors.
I gotcha. Okay. Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's get back to your ranch here just a little bit, because we kind of started talking about the county here. So first of all, how big is your ranch? You had 5 siblings, so are all you guys equal owners? And then I think you and I talked off camera a while ago about what your succession plan, which was pretty hilarious to me. So maybe I get you to share that with us one more time. But so talk us through that a little bit, since we kind of jumped around here a little bit.
Yeah. So our family business structure is kind of complex, but it all boils down to we had the home family ranch here that my mom had,
right?
And 3 of us, my twin brother Joe and my brother Dave, bought the ranch from my mother when she decided to move down closer to my sister and my other brother down in Sacramento.
Okay.
This is 25 years ago now. And so we bought it, but separately. We have a couple of family partnerships, but generally speaking, we own everything individually.
Okay.
And so, Holly and I have a herd of cows. My brother Joe has a herd of cows. My brother Dan has a herd of cows. And we own some real estate together. We lease a lot of pasture together.
Lease out or lease to run your cattle on?
We rent to put our cattle
understood.
on.
Okay.
Yeah, and the way our operation works is we started out as a cow-calf kind of operation where we would breed cows, have calves, and sell the calves as weaners when they get weaned off the cow, and then do it all again. Have that cow have a calf every year, and we've kind of expanded that over the last 20 years to now where we retain ownership on all of our cattle all the way through the cycle until they're harvested. We send them to Colorado. We have a relationship with a feedlot there where we have them custom fed and market them back there.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But the life cycle of our cows is we acquired a lot of federal grazing permits actually in Plumas County predominantly, some in Lassen County.
Okay.
Where in the summertime, we take the cows and well, maybe I'll start in the winter. That's probably a better way to approach it. Our cows calve for the most part, and there's some notable exceptions to this. For the most part, they calve in January and February.
Okay.
and they're down in the Sacramento Valley at that time. We lease pasture down there. The cows, for the most part, all go down to, we graze cattle in, I think, 7 different counties now.
Wow.
Pretty much wherever we can
Jeez.
find pasture. And so the cows will calve down there. We'll brand them and process the cattle down in the valley. And then in the early summer, May, June, we'll bring them up, the cows and calves up onto the forest permits, which is federal, a lot of federally owned land and some private leases that we have up there. And they've been all right in the middle of all the recent fires that we've all heard about.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we graze them up there until fall. Then we'll bring them down to the kind of the Susanville area where we own some land, and we also lease additional land.
Okay.
And that's where we'll kind of wean those calves, get them processed and prepared to go to the feedlot in Colorado.
Okay.
In December-ish, we'll send those cattle to Colorado, and they'll finish out their life cycle there and get harvested there, the next July. And then we'll take the cows and we'll ship them back down to the Sacramento Valley and start the process over again.
Sure.
And in our case, because of the whole family has kind of been in the agriculture business, but also in other professions. One of my brothers is an attorney. My twin brother Joe, that I do a lot with, is a banker. We have kind of our business model has been really to hire independent contractors to do a lot of what you might think is traditionally would be done by operators. We hire virtually all of our trucking. I know we've talked about that in the past, and I always joke about, maybe I'll just buy a truck and I'll retire all my cows. Probably the last thing I want to do. But we hire all of our trucking. We hire a lot of our farming, harvesting of our hay and our big farming and that sort of thing.
Okay.
And we've kind of been, I guess, kind of forced to do it that way because most of us, or all of us, have been in our own professions and kind of too busy to really do all of that. But we do really enjoy, that aspect of it. And I'm really looking forward in retirement to being able to spend more time doing that.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the business model that we have. And I mentioned Holly and I started with 8 cows back in 1994, I think. And we have steadily grown over the years. Holly and I've got about 600 mother cows now.
Oh, that's amazing.
And my brothers also have similar herd sizes. And so it's kind of a chore to just keep feed in front of that many cows without feeding a lot of hay, which is expensive.
So tell me with what your model, how many roughly acres do you guys kind of have to try and source for grazing? And I understand you supplement with some hay, but what does that look like acreage wise for the non-ag person to try and figure out how to make that work?
Yeah, and it's kind of all over the board. In the grazing permits up on the forest, and we graze about 800 cows, give or take, up on the Fumas forest on a normal summer, and it's in 75 or 80,000 acres. It's just a big,
really big, yeah,
land.
Yeah, but probably not a lot of feed, right?
Right, and the cattle really have to travel. Down in the Sacramento Valley, it's more like 10 to 20 acres per cow for the winter season. And then in some of the irrigated grounds that we also rent in the fall, and some of the hay grounds and stuff, it might be 2 acres to the cow. So it really varies. It's more about the feed availability than it is the number of acres. And we always talk in terms of animal unit months, in terms of carrying capacity versus how many acres, because an acre out in the desert
Right.
is not, doesn't, equate to an acre of irrigated alfalfa.
Yeah.
So, and part of that, part of the business is kind of understanding that we've, like I mentioned, we lease a lot of land, and more, most of our landlords, some of them are literally Chinese owned. Some are people that complete absentee owners. I can think of really only one or two out of all the land that we lease that are really involved in agriculture.
Yes.
And so, and they don't always know what what the capacity of their property is, or what have you. And so, it's really important. Part of what we do is trying to evaluate what we think we can make work.
Yeah.
We've also, fortunately, the state of California has acquired just an enormous amount of ranch land over the last 30 years. And, and lo and behold, a lot of these lands that they've acquired are subject to fire. And so, recently, over the last several years, the Department of Fish and Wildlife has decided that, cattle are maybe not such a bad thing, and they're going to, bid out some grazing on these properties that they've owned. And so we've engaged in bidding a lot of those properties to graze cattle. We've been successful in obtaining some of those.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, and I think that's it's one kind of bright spot, I think, in the state management where they're doing that. Unfortunately, they're not doing a lot of that in the Lassen County area. They are down in the Sacramento Valley and the foothill areas.
So do you think that's a direct result of fire and them kind of finally correlating some fire resiliency to grazing?
It definitely is. In some of the areas where we lease without cattle, you've got decadent dry grass in those foothill areas that's just really ripe to burn.
Yeah.
And also the cattle, some of that decadent vegetation, even if it doesn't burn, is really not that great for wildlife.
Very true.
It's healthy to have some diversity. So we've been engaging in that, and a lease with a private landowner oftentimes is a handshake and a check, and you unload the cows and away you go. But dealing with some of the agencies, the bid packet, and I know you're familiar with bidding state and federal jobs. To enter into a grazing lease, sometimes you have an inch thick binder of things. And, we've been, I think, pretty good at being able to wade through some of that stuff and be successful.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing.
So that's part of our model, and we utilize a lot of dogs and horses. And one of my favorite things is getting out there and working my dogs and my horses. And I'm really looking forward in retirement to do some of that.
Yeah, because dogs need work and they need that continual thing. But there's nothing more rewarding than seeing a dog that you've worked and doing its job, and because they just thrive, they just love doing their job, and you can almost just see the happiness radiate off them when they're out there doing their job. Yeah, it's really cool. Okay, so let's take a second here and transition, right? So we've talked about kind of your story and the ranch, and then kind of your community service through the Lassen County. So what this part of this podcast is about is, we've talked about some of the great things and a few of the challenges, of course, with where we live. But, so why don't you contrast for me? You and Holly have a couple that haven't been to this area. Kind of highlight what would be the perfect weekend to kind of show them where we live and what makes it great, and kind of talk me through how you and Holly would approach that.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, kind of just thinking about what we were going to talk about today. Because I listened to your podcast that you did with Mike.
Okay. He had 104 temperature that day, and I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if, with Michael, I was expecting this could go one of two ways. This could be absolutely a wild, crazy ride, and he actually was fairly subdued, and he did a great job. He did an amazing job, but I didn't know what to expect. I was really looking forward to it, but
Yeah,
unfortunately, he wasn't
yeah,
feeling so great. But he still did an amazing job. But anyway, go ahead. Go ahead. Didn't mean to look too long.
yeah. But I my perfect weekend. I love Lassen County. I consider it my home. Been here my whole life. I enjoy not just the scenery, although it's beautiful. And we have Holly and I have a home that looks out over Thompson Peak, or looks at Thompson Peak, Diamond Mountain, and to the east out to the desert, and
Oh,
great sunsets and sunrises.
right.
And we really enjoy. I really enjoy more and more being at home. But as far as things to do, the most enjoyment that I get from the community is really the social interaction with people that I've known. In some cases for 10 minutes, and sometimes my entire life.
Yeah.
I'm involved, as you are, in the Rotary Club
Right.
and in cattlemen's organizations and chambers of commerce, and my perfect time is to go out and socialize with those friends and neighbors that I work with or know their families, and we would just really enjoy it, spending time with friends. I do like to go hunting once in a while. I wouldn't consider myself to be an avid hunter.
Yeah.
But there's lots of time to do that. We like I mentioned, we graze our cattle up on the Plymouth Forest. We'll take our travel trailer up there for the weekend, and do some work and play at the same time,
Yep.
and those sorts of things. We love to go to help friends brand their cattle or gather to do those. I guess what might seem as somewhat boring things, but those are kind of the things we enjoy.
Yeah.
We enjoy having Rotary parties in our house, and having the community leaders come and enjoy them. So
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I'm always telling people, we live in God's country, right? And that's just where we get to live. My wife and I travel quite a bit. We obviously have friends that travel a lot more than us, but we've been to Europe, we've been to Hawaii, we've been to these different places, and every time I come home, I'm like, God dang, where we live is just so beautiful. And then the flip side of that is I realize that maybe I'm getting older or whatever, but my tolerance for being stuck in traffic and going literally 400 feet, hitting a stoplight, and then go another 400 feet and hit a stoplight. And I can literally feel the seconds of my life ticking away in traffic. And that's something we just don't deal with here. I mean, people talk about, I tell them how big of a, territory we cover just between, Bernie, Altura, Susanville is kind of our triangle quadrant that I spend most of my time in with our work. And they're like, oh man, it must take you so long. And I'm like, actually, no, it's an hour and a half. And the only time that I may deal with any traffic is when it's snowing, it's slowing you down. That's about, or Richard's pushing cattle across the road and I got to wait for the cattle. That's, it's just incredible. 2 days ago, we're working on Highway 36, right? At that overlook at Lake Almanor there on highway. That's where we're working through that area. The job goes from Westwood to the Chester Causeway there. And, I've got some pictures of us working, and it's got Lake Almanor, Mount Lassen, and all these snowy peaks. And it's just, my gosh, we are so blessed to get to work and live. And I'm like, I can't believe this is called work. People would pay to just come have these views, and we get to do it for a living. So, yeah.
yeah, when you retire someday, people will begin to ask you, like they've been asking me. Well, now that you and Holly are retired, where are you going to move to?
Right.
And
Yeah.
and my response is always the same. Find me a better place, and I'm open to entertaining it. But for now, I I haven't found one, so I'm sticking right here.
I really feel like we were just so absolutely blessed. Okay, so there's one more topic that I want to make sure that I cover with you, just because I'm an aviation junkie. So we talked about your son, so just share with us here a little bit about what your son's doing and kind of what his career path is, because
Sure.
I loved hearing about that a little bit.
Yeah. So Holly and I have one son, Nathan, and he grew up on the ranch doing ranch kid stuff and 4-H FFA and having a mom as a FFA advisor didn't hurt. And he's the joy of our life,
Yeah.
as most parents would say, right? And I think as parents, you kind of always, you want your kid maybe to follow in your footsteps, or take over the family business,
Right.
or what have you. But
Right.
and I fell into that category. There's nothing I would like better than to have him, want to do what I'm doing. But as fate happens, right? And Nathan does really enjoy some of the ranch stuff, but he doesn't, at least currently. And he's 25 years old, so he's
Right.
still a kid. But
Yep.
but he went away to college in San Diego and got a degree in business there, and worked down there for a while. Really loved San Diego. I mean, what's not to like in terms of when you're in your early 20s? But
Right.
and then decided to change course about a year ago. Wasn't didn't want to stick with the business position that he had, and decided to do what I consider to be kind of a 180-degree turn and go to commercial flight school. And so he's in Texas right now, going to flight school and hoping to get through with that in about a year and become a commercial pilot, which not something I would have predicted or
Yeah.
or thought, but I'm as a parent, you just kind of, I think, need to be happy that your kids are being successful and happy, and we sure are. And that's where you were, I think, asking me the other day about what the succession plan was for the ranch. And I said, well, there's still some hope maybe that Nathan will want to come back and take over, but if not, I guess I'm going to have to stay young enough until there's some grandkids to recreate.
Yeah.
So
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So does he want to fly for the airlines, or does he want to fly privately, or does he know yet? Just wants to fly.
He wants to fly commercially, commercial airlines.
Yeah. That's amazing. Some of my friends are Southwest pilots. One Delta pilot, one Southwest pilot, and I got to tell you, they have a pretty amazing life. They both, I was with one of them. We were in Boise at a birthday party of a friend of ours. And, we'd been there for the weekend, and we were having coffee that morning, and, he's on his phone and gets off his phone a little bit. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I don't know what the right terminology is, but I was basically picking up a route for this afternoon. I'm gonna be flying this afternoon. I'm going from here to, I can't remember where he was going, and he was gonna take off there in Boise and was gonna fly to, I think he does a route to Hawaii a lot, and
Wow.
And I'm just like, that's just incredible. And I said, so you have total control? He's like, we have complete control. We work when we want to work. And so, I booked my calendar out, of course, for a long time, but we knew this weekend was going to be busy, but now we've been off for 3 or 4 days, and I'm interested to get back to work. I am excited to go start flying again. So I just thought, wow, that's just, that's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing.
Yeah. I know, and I think you talked with maybe Mike a little bit about, opportunities and locally, and I have maybe a little different perspective on that. A lot of people are often clamor for, we got to find all these jobs for our kids to have so they can stay home.
Right.
And there's some value to that too. A lot of us would like to have family first, that sort of thing. But on the other side of that, I think it's really important, and I think it's a great time in the world for young people to be able to go out and see the world, and then come, and then decide if you want to come back.
Yeah.
I think the happiest people that I know, a lot of them grew up here, but they went away and because of that kind of value what we have here,
Yeah.
and came back with a little different mindset.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah. Well, the challenge with some of the challenges with our area is there's just not a lot to do traditional young people things, right? There's,
yes.
and whatever you define that. And if you're, like my oldest son hunts, fishes, outdoors, for him, there's no limit to things to do where we live, right? But if you have
Right.
somebody that's, they want to go to the movies at a big movie theater, they want to, whatever the things are that, gosh, I don't even so out of tune now. I don't even know what kids do now very well, but
They snowboard,
yeah,
and they fly
yeah.
places every weekend.
Well, we grew up on motorcycles. I mean, we went everywhere on motorcycles, and then 3-wheelers in the snow, and my gosh, we were always just going. And so this area still, in my mind, dominates that. It's just it seems like the challenge for us now is that kids are attached to screens a lot, right? And they're not really going outside and sometimes taking in what we have, but. I agree. I'll tell you that I've done such a good job. Our succession plans before you can come back to work here, you have to go away for a minimum of 5 years and go prove yourself somewhere else, right? And that's what I did. That's what my business partner Weston did before we came back here. And I think I've done it so well. My oldest son is running his own business and lives in Reading, so at least I get to see him regularly. My daughter is absolutely killing it in Scotland. She's the youngest senior account manager at the oldest and largest advertising firm in all of Scotland.
Wow.
She's doing amazing. And my youngest son is down in Texas on a really large construction project. Absolutely loves it down there. And, has already bought a couple rentals and is really interested in the real estate market. And so, I might have done such a good job that they never come home, which I don't know. But I will say regarding Nathan, and who knows what he's going to do. And I know you're like me, you just want to be happy and raise a great family and live a fulfilling life, right? That's what we want as parents. But one thing I knew I wasn't ever coming home because my dad was such a dominant force in our business. And I just felt like he could ever give up any control. That was my deal. I just like he's never going to give up any control at all. And what changed that mentality for me was when I had my first child, and we were living in Stockton. I was working mostly in the East Bay. We lived in a really beautiful area of Stockton. People are like, Stockton? I don't know. We lived there. We lived by the college. It was a beautiful park. Loved it there. However, I didn't want to send my kids to school there, and, those of us you can play all 3 sports if you want to, you can be as active as you want. Our FFA Parley Pro team was absolutely dominant. We were in state contention. If we didn't win it, we were pissed, we were in state contention every year. There's just so many opportunities at these smaller schools. And we never had to go through metal detectors to get to school, and didn't have to worry about gangs and some of the crazy things these kids have to worry about nowadays. So that's what changed it for me. So who knows what's in the future for Nathan, right? Who knows?
You never know.
Yeah, never know. Well, Richard, I really want to say thank you for joining the podcast today. You did an incredible job. What an amazing backstory. What an incredible career you have had. Not only just in the ranching side of it, but just in, when I look at you, you are like the model of what we all hope our local government looks like. You are approachable. You are, solutions oriented. You are, hey, how can we solve this? But you also protect your team and say, hey, we've got great staff. They're working their tails off. They're doing a great job, and could really walk that middle ground between both worlds, the private world and then kind of that public sector world. And I'm just applaud you on a life well lived and a career well served. And I know you're not done. I know you're just getting started on the ranch and stuff, but I just want to say thank you and just how impressed I am with your career so far.
Well, thank you for that. And one thing I really appreciate that, and I hope I live up to that. And I agree with you. I don't think I'm done.
No.
I'm 3 months into retirement, and it's been wonderful. I'm not gonna kid. I haven't had a board day yet, but it's probably not the end for me.
Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to mention though, because I just kind of touched on it, but a real big part of my life and my social network and my guidance, as far as the True North is, and I know you're a member as well as Mike and Carrie too, is the Rotary Club.
Yeah.
And and I reluctantly got involved in Rotary about 15 years ago or so, because I thought it was just this huge commitment that I didn't really have time for.
Right.
But I'm so glad I did.
Yeah.
Because as every week you get to visit with the leaders of the community that become your really close friends and people that you can rely on and support. And I just wanted to mention that because I just think it's such a valuable part of our community that's really underutilized.
Well, I'll share with you. That's how I really got to know you is through Rotary. And, it's funny as just the only time that I really had interacted with the county is when we're trying to push, through permits on things that we're trying to do. And, sometimes those things are controversial and sometimes they're not, but they're never easy. And so, it was, and it's just a natural thing that people think. I'm like, man, does everybody at that county hate me? We're really not that bad of guys. We're really just trying to employ people and have smooth roads and all that stuff. And, it was great to, hey, he's just a regular guy, just like we are. So anyway, really enjoyed getting to know you through that. But yeah, Rotary, great plug for Rotary, service above self, right? That's what Rotary is all about. And, put the flags out with you, a couple times. And, and I need to continue to get more involved in it seems like there's never enough time to do everything that you want to do, but even I'd highly encourage those people that just have a little bit of time, to give it a try because it's a great organization that does tremendous things for our community.
Yeah. And thanks for all you do. I just really appreciate your the way you're taking on this North State Rocks and putting some positive spin on some of the good things that are happening here.
Oh, thank you.
In a world where everything's very negative, you're really doing a good thing here, and I sure appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you, Richard. I really appreciate it. It means a lot coming from you. And thanks again for your time today. And give Holly a hug for me and enjoy the rest of your day. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.